Hi, I'm Theta. It's the first casual Monday of the new winter season, and I have a handful of new shows from this weekend I wanted to share a thing or two about. For Medalist, I talk about the transformation of a character's past into a tool for the present. In Tasokare Hotel, I cover its exposition technique and how it keeps the audience unbalanced, and in OKITSURA, I fix on how its full title is a clever bit of misdirection. We also have Blue Box back from hiatus, where I'll continue to focus on the newest character, and our rewatch of Girls Band Cry is up to its 8th installment. An incredible episode that really challenged me to analyze, and solidified my already high opinion of the work. Always love it when that happens with an episode 8. The Winter 2025 preview show is 6 days away now, my spoiler-light live show roundup of most of the new anime over on my Twitch channel. Ordinarily, that's held on the 3rd Sunday of the season, but almost everything is out by then, so I moved it up. Unfortunately, that probably means there will be no Casual Monday next week. Even if there is, there will be no Girls Band Cry segment, so we'll continue it 2 weeks from now. Besides the way this video is titled, I have other changes in store for the season, but we will get to that on the other side of the preview show. For now, let's begin with some new shows. Medalist, then Tasokare Hotel, then OKITSURA. Then we'll end with our return to Blue Box and Girls Band Cry. Medalist, the touching story of this mid-20s dude who likes to scare small children. I must say I'm impressed at how much my opinion of Tsukasa changed over the course of this premiere. He wants a crying 5-year-old to apologize for running into him, and then feels envious of said child for beginning to skate so early, and tops it off by inserting himself into an arrangement between the receptionist and Inori that was her only means of pursuing her one love of ice skating. Even if these things are technically the right take on each encounter, he doesn't come off as very sympathetic, and so we are likewise tempted to extend no sympathy to him. The thing I wanted to focus on today is how his history and resulting bitterness evolve from a liability into an asset, possible because of his run-in with Inori. Figure skating is competitive and quite difficult, and starting from a young age to build technique alongside a maturing body imparts an advantage that can't be overcome with too late a start. Tsukasa started at 14, and even then was told he was attempting the impossible. 12 years later, he certainly believes it, and though he persists in the ice skating world, he carries a rather large chip on his shoulder. There is an unexplained mention of an audition, presumably something he is working towards that involves skating, but in the meantime, he is looking for work in the field. His former partner Hitomi wants to recommend him as an assistant coach at the rink where most of the episode takes place. But it's not something he was actually aiming towards, and not an area where he has experience. More to the point, he downplays his credentials of having made it to nationals with her, saying it was only due to her skills, that it was a fluke, that she feels differently, but whatever the truth, it seems Tsukasa started his entire skating journey believing he was far behind, and has never stopped believing otherwise. He regrets his late start, but especially his inability to speak up earlier about what he wanted to do. Now, even though his introduction to Inori was him policing a fare dodger, getting a face full of 5th grader and then a face full of tea, the story turns around him noticing that she carries the same skating textbook he read in his own past. Opening it, he'll discover her extensive notes while she explains the reason for sneaking in, that she wants to skate, but her mother is opposed over the chance she'll get hurt. Her only plan is to practice in secret until she reaches some point of proficiency, and I guess she hasn't gotten much further than that. Understanding that she's serious, he urges her to talk to her mother, writes out a list of clubs to contact, and when learning she's 11, tells her that she's at the cutoff age for becoming a pro skater. If she's ever going to ask her mother, it needs to be now. Well, the club he's interviewing at was on that list, and so their paths cross immediately. Inori's barrier to skating wasn't just the nerve to ask, but the tragic history of her older sister who did start skating at 5 years old, but eventually was injured and unable to continue in the sport. Her mother isn't just gun-shy about having a second daughter get injured, she also knows that Inori is at a disadvantage compared to those her age who have already been skating for years. The intent in their visit isn't to find a club, but to have coaches assist her in squashing Inori's dream with a reality check. Here, the characterization of Inori becomes important. I appreciate how believably childish and helpless she is. She is a poor performer in school and ostracized among her peers. She is not faring well, and it seems she has been reminded of that repeatedly. The only thing she cares about is skating, which at first was a dream she didn't dare speak to her mother, and now a dream she is told is an impossibility. Unsurprisingly, she presents as a miserable creature. Still, the amount she has learned from just the book and her own practice is impressive, both in terms of talent and drive. A self-starting grade schooler is remarkable all on its own. 11 years old is a late start, but she's not actually just starting either. Furthermore, she gives a desperate and impassioned plea to be allowed to skate, to have this one thing she can be good at, a way to stop being embarrassed of herself. Despite this, her mother is determined to refuse her, believing the age issue is too big a hurdle to overcome. And if she'd been presenting her case to any other coach, that might have been the end of it. They would surely agree. But this is a sore spot for Tsukasa, who evidently allowed the naysayers in his past to win out and is haunted by it still. Thinking back, he will wonder what he needed back then. What did he want? What could have changed his trajectory? I applaud Medalist for not spelling this out directly. The answer to what he needed was a coach who believed in him, an advocate for his potential, an encouraging voice. So rather than say that, he steps into the role himself, becomes for Inori the person he wishes had been there in his past. He wasn't that keen on the whole idea of being a coach, and I think technically wasn't even hired yet, but glimpsing what the job would entail, he jumps in with both feet. I think he's rather more dedicated to Inori's success than she is by the end of his spiel, building steam as he lists out all the things she can already claim as steps on the way. Granted, this whole display lands him in hot water with his homie for showing such overt and loud favoritism to a student, but that's just the series' flavor of humor. What it really does is redeem him to the audience for his earlier sour attitude. That the origin of that attitude is also the very experience that allows him this hero moment is a nice touch. It's the kind of storytelling flourish that makes me optimistic about what else might be in store. For Tasokare Hotel, I wanted to note the way it parcels out its premise to keep the audience engaged through its first episode, not only setting up and resolving a first mystery, but using that mystery to establish expectations for the series ahead. There is a succession of elements introduced without explanation that are each meant to pique our interest, but they are given only a little time to linger before more are added, continually tugging at our attention with the question that each prompts. We open with a girl stabbed in the back, the action already taken and the assailant walking away unseen as the girl tries to make sense of what has happened. But rather than an answer, we jump with the girl into a barren land bathed in warm twilight. Where she is and why leap to our mind, but further questions pile up. Why has her outfit changed? Why has her face obscured? Why can she not recall what is happening just before? But again, no answers. Just a sign that materializes in front of her when she wasn't looking, that itself directs her and our attention behind, towards a hotel that also wasn't there before. And that is the first 90 seconds of the show. Fortunately, we do get answers in short order, that this is the Tasokare Hotel, and that it exists between the world of the living and the world of the dead, which at least helps explain all the initial changes. Of course, learning this from a man with a flaming head adds its own set of questions, so we are at best even. The episode persists in this manner, giving an answer or a next step to a previous question or step, but in doing so, introducing something else that begs explanation. Our as-yet unnamed girl learns that she is a soul who is uncertain whether she's alive or dead, that she is a guest at this hotel, whether she intends it or not, and that she can't remember her own name, with the addendum that this is a common situation for new guests. At this point, 3 minutes into the episode, we at least seem to have reached a point where we can get our bearings. This hotel is some kind of way station to the afterlife, and our unnamed point-of-view character is in a state of limbo. But this is a sequence of events with much precedent. Many other guests having come to this hotel in the same state, greeted by the same fire-headed guy, who we can presume helps said guests resolve their transient condition. She's a human in an ethereal space, and his inhumanness suggests that he belongs here and she does not. We now must simply await an explanation of how the situation is supposed to be resolved. What the episode does then, repeatedly, is to unbalance us whenever we reach such a moment that we think we have a grasp of it. A boy called Atori is called into the room, and he's a human whose face is not obscured like hers is. He is to guide her to the room, which means he works there despite his humanness. Okay, maybe it isn't all ethereal beings working at the hotel. Maybe it's just the manager. Except, in their conversation on the way to the room, we learn that no, he's also an uncertain soul and has been here for just 2 weeks. Upon reaching her room and receiving an explanation that it should contain items to help her recover her memory, we seem like we've reached another point where the story becomes clear. She is supposed to search the room, unlock pieces of her memory, and eventually use that information to resolve her status as an uncertain soul. That must be the shape of the episode, then. The mystery of the opening stabbing attack solved through this supernatural hunt for clues and memories. We do, in fact, seem to get such progress, as she finds a concert ticket that sparks a grainy recollection that in turn causes a book satchel containing her ID to spill out of the wardrobe. Recovering her name, Neko Tsukahara recovers her face. We can presume the same went for Atori sometime in the 2 weeks prior. But ultimately, that is not the shape of the episode. Neko will explore the hotel and discover other non-human beings in the bar, so it's not just the manager, as well as another uncertain soul whose face isn't obscured but is replaced by tarot cards. And in fact, it will be the resolving of her mystery and the search of her room that forms the second half of the episode, not Neko's own uncertain status. That guest's situation introduces other oddities or changes to what we had begun to take for granted. She confuses Atori for someone she knew in life, even though she can't remember her own name. We learn that the rooms can change over time, and we see her physically affected by a recovered memory. Even at the end, when she determines that the attack she suffered didn't kill her, she is uncertain about returning, not knowing what to do with her life after the loss of the fortune-telling streamer she so depended upon. Neko conjectures a solution to this crisis, and that particular case is wrapped up. Within it, though, we are given an expectation of what is to come. Neko enjoyed this entire mystery of uncertain souls and the individually tailored rooms with their changing clues. She asks to work there, and so we now expect that future guests will provide her more opportunities to play at Limbo Detective, for so long as her own status remains uncertain. Beyond that, too, we have Atori, the fellow uncertain soul, and a girl named Ruri, who is somewhat less keen on Neko's continued presence. Over time, I imagine we get to know them as well, but with an underlying tension that they may recover their own memories and so exit the hotel at any time. Thus, the core story mechanic of a hotel that helps resolve uncertain souls carries with it a bittersweet promise that any victory over the mysteries introduced will result in the loss of a character they come to know. Since the premiere constantly worked to unbalance us with how it paced its exposition, we might also assume the overall story will shake up the pattern it appears to offer, perhaps with little warning. The fact that some guests will end up being dead rather than returning to their lives also carries a promise of heartache, and so there is this baked-in tension to the setup that we don't know whether any given character is headed towards joy or sorrow, life or death. This strikes me as a rather robust story framework, and they managed to lay all of it out in a single episode that kept pulling our interest forward with well-paced reveals, mysteries, and answers which brought further questions. If nothing else, the potential that it's established is impressive. This series pulls off such a neat trick and has such a charming premiere that I just had to talk about it at least this once. The full subtitle of Fell in Love with an Okinawan Girl, but I just wish I know what she's saying is, well, bad grammar, but implies two central characters. The speaker, the one who fell in love, and the target of affection, the Okinawan girl. A romantic comedy needs some kind of barrier to romance, and that is present as well. The speaker doesn't know what she's saying. We don't know why the speaker doesn't know what she's saying, but we might reasonably conjecture it's due to being an Okinawan girl. We might confidently assume we've got a good picture of the whole thing just from that overlong title. But we have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, hornswoggled, and not just us, but the initial point of view character Teruaki, who the others call Teiru. He's a transfer student from Tokyo, and as such, is drawn to be considerably paler than the rest of his Okinawan classmates and neighbors. But it's another difference that proves more vexing: the amount of Okinawans who speak Uchi-Naguchi, the language from before the island was part of Japan. Most seem to just pepper their Japanese with the occasional term to varying degrees. But Kyon, the girl he crushes on, has a tendency to load her entire sentences with the speech whenever she gets animated, which is basically all the time, confounding his attempts at communication. That is indeed a mighty, rom-com-worthy hurdle Teru must leap if he is to pursue her. What's more, Teru is genre-savvy, comparing his situation to one found in manga, though his inability to talk to his crush is for a different reason than most. Fortunately, her friend Kana is often around to translate and help him start to understand, so his romantic aspirations have a lifeline. But that is the bamboozle. Kana is not the helpful friend, side character to Kyon, she's the other main character, and takes turns with Teru as our point of view. Kyon's constant use of Uchi-Naguchi is still plot relevant, but it's because it gives Kana a constant excuse to interact with Teru, who she is head over heels for, a fact that is not even hinted at until almost 5 minutes in. From there, the switcheroo becomes more obvious. Kyon's constant Uchi-Naguchi somewhat masks her characterization, as her inscrutable antics have to be parsed through someone else most of the time. She is basically static throughout the episode, as we learn almost everything we know about her personality in the first minutes. It is Kana, instead, who goes through a large array of emotions and reactions, expresses desires and disappointments and embarrassments, presents a goal and pursues it, and so on. These are hallmarks of a main character, and a lot of them are absent in Kyon, who is 90% unintelligible Genki girl, 10% confused. Teru is actually wrong genre savvy. He's not in a story about his pursuit of this girl with a thick dialect, but in a story where he's pursued by her best friend. That is so much better than the premise I thought we were getting in the first few minutes. A story just about him and Kyon could wear out its welcome rather quickly, as he either begins to understand the speech or she lessens her usage, diffusing the will they or won't they tension through something as undramatic as translation. Instead, we have Kana to root for against the backdrop of Teru's status as a fish out of water in the island prefecture. That part of the setup drives a lot of the humor, as he commits little missteps in his ignorance, but it also allows him to serve as the vehicle for what is frankly a love letter to Okinawan culture. And Kana is right there in the midst of that as well, guiding him and us to better understand the differences between their island and the rest of Japan, a perfect and ongoing opportunity to try to draw closer to him. I am completely charmed by this premiere, and while I don't know if I'll have enough to say about it for it to show up in future videos, I'm almost certainly going to tune in every week. Beginning the episode with Chinatsu heading out of town for nationals means she can be off stage for at least this episode, allowing Taiki to gain some perspective without the distraction of her presence. And since Hina is also focused on her nationals, she can likewise sit out a moment. Last time we talked about Blue Box, I used the new character of Karin as my lens on the episode, capitalizing on the novelty of her appearance. And so today, well, I'm going to go back to the same well and use her again, looking at a couple of conversations between her and Taiki, and a memory of her from Haru's point of view. Though Haru is bitter that badminton holds their tournament in the next prefecture rather than somewhere more exotic, it does mean that it's easy to travel there to cheer him on, which is why Taiki and Karin run into one another. She rather quickly tricks him into admitting that he has a crush on Chinatsu, and though I'm sure she already knew that thanks to Haru, that little stunt means they can talk openly about it. At first it's a kind of interrogation. How long have you liked her? Was it before you started living together? What sort of housemate is she? The fact that she knows they live together could only have come from Chinatsu herself, a secret kept from their classmates, so Karin here is a close friend indeed. They commiserate over some of Chinatsu's idiosyncrasies, like a habit of staring into space, and all of this is one part Karin feeling him out, and one part a little small talk that can lead into bigger talk. Thus will Taiki feel comfortable expressing admiration for how Karin and Haru juggle their work and sport obligations with their relationship. Though Karin first teases him about whether he's thinking of how to pull off the same juggling act if he and Chinatsu start dating, she will take the opportunity to expound their relationship history. They'd known each other a long time, and probably both developed feelings in middle school. Even though they hung out and enjoyed each other's company a lot, she figured they both had their own goals. Like Taiki and Chinatsu, they thought it better to focus on just one thing. They might have persisted in this state even to today, if not for one particular act of thoughtfulness on Haru's part, volunteering his own embarrassing youthful journal as a way to keep Karen from worrying herself into sleeplessness, with a promise he'd help her work out a plan in the morning. It is well said that love is paying attention. Haru knew her tendency and worry, and tried to provide relief in a proactive, ad hoc way. All the cuter for a willingness to show her the uncool parts of his past if it would distract her from her turmoil. Such a gesture pushes them past their stalemate. Not the gift itself, but the thought that produced it. Evidence of Haru's understanding of Karen and a willingness to act on it to her benefit, even at the expense of himself. As she says, the only thing she's going to be thinking about now is him. Possibly there is foreshadowing in this, that Taiki might one day likewise demonstrate an understanding of Chinatsu and an eagerness to help her that is unmistakable in its genuine affection. But we might also draw the parallel to the memory he shared with her back at the beginning, reminding her of her former passion and disappointment and the way it made him want to work hard as well. Love is paying attention. I won't be shocked if that was the beginning of Chinatsu's own affections. And equally relevant to Taiki's situation, Karen will explain how things changed after Haru's gesture, and how they are pulling off the juggling act that started the conversation. As she says, they couldn't go back to how things were once they knew they liked one another. If you remember, the very last thing I said about this series was how all that was required to change the situation, where they keep piling up hurts, is for either Chinatsu or Taiki to know how the other feels. And now Karen's story essentially backs that assertion. The reality changed, and they had to figure out how to adapt to it. Haru at least was hesitant, and they came to an agreement that if either started lagging in their careers, it would be cause to call it off. But really, they are just experimenting. They are trying to figure it out. Taiki will have a moment to change his appraisal of them. He had assumed that they were just natural-born winners, a category we can presume he does not apply to himself, and yet they're also fumbling around and doing their best to make sense of things. Karen makes one more key statement here. She couldn't keep imagining how things might go wrong without actually giving it a shot. Better failure than regret. That statement dovetails with Haru's memory of their first meeting, at swimming lessons back in the 5th grade. He was into a lot of things before discovering a love for badminton, and it seems he was simply a natural talent, succeeding well enough at each activity. Karen, though, was far from a natural in the pool, and this perplexed him. Reading between the lines, I imagine Haru was never terrible at anything, and is somewhat horrified at the idea of doing something if you're bad at it. He demands to know why she persists. She's only embarrassing herself, but she turns it around on him. If you feel sorry for my embarrassment, then teach me. She's not taking swimming lessons because she's good at it and wants to look good doing it. She's taking lessons because she doesn't know how, but her youthful dream of swimming with dolphins requires her to learn. She doesn't want to conclude she's bad at it before giving it a real try, and, wise beyond her years, asserts that just because she's bad at it now doesn't mean the future her will be the same. And sure enough, she manages to swim fine by the end. She wasn't afraid of the embarrassment of getting it wrong or failing, and because of that, she overcame. In that light, it's no surprise that she's the one who took the risk to confess her feelings. Certainly, an actress can't be afraid of embarrassment. Haru, it seems, felt chastised, silly for never telling her how he felt because of his own potential embarrassment. She was always the cool one, the one who challenged herself rather than shrink from a fear of being embarrassed. Haru will use that as motivation in his match with Hondo, which we won't get into, but I just wanted to note what a healthy outlook he has here. While he's shamed that she is more daring than he is, it causes him to admire her rather than resent her. It inspires him to try harder, to be a better version of himself, not to feel inadequate or upstaged. While Taiki can't eavesdrop on his thoughts like we can, this is a mindset that Taiki is on the cusp of understanding himself. He already admires Chinatsu for her ethic and success, but initially allowed that to intimidate him into believing that he must prove himself first. Now, his own efforts to strive towards nationals have probably improved him in her eyes, that just like Karen, she is motivated by watching someone work hard. But Taiki failing to make the cut threatened to make him feel inadequate again. like the gulf between them was uncrossable. Chinatsu was the one who encouraged him to continue reaching for lofty goals, and Karin will do something similar at the end of this episode. You work hard too, in badminton and in love. Unfortunately, Taiki doesn't appreciate what it must mean for his crush's best friend to encourage him like this, but she will go on to prompt him as to whether or not he'll confess. She thinks he has an advantage living under the same roof, though he'll explain about how that adds an additional hurdle. So, finally, she rather exclaims that everyone is overthinking things. Crucially, that while it's fine to be considerate of how other people feel, what he's really doing is being considerate of the version of Chinatsu in his own head. The real one might feel something different entirely. And of course, Karin knows this for a fact, so this isn't just rhetoric. In that, then, is something I want to emphasize, though it is unsaid in the work so far. Karin knows how they both feel, and if either suspected, then the situation would change. She could break the stalemate herself. She encourages him to keep trying, but does not state outright how her friend feels or would receive his attempts. And I rather expect she will not report back to Chinatsu how Taiki crushes on her. It is, after all, more complicated than neither of them expressing how they feel, between their own sport goals and the living situation. Similar to Haru and Karin's story, there are competing priorities that do not go away just because they realize their affection is mutual. For Karin, it simply reached a point that she was willing to take a risk and put in the work that was required on the other side. For Taiki and Chinatsu, they may not yet be to that same point. Their affections may not yet be strong enough to override their caution, and this may be true even if they both knew how the other felt. Karin and Haru got over the hump because of a mutual display, his thoughtfulness in the gifted journal and her daring in the confession. Such an earnest moment has an inertia of its own, enough to override their other objections. Taiki and Chinatsu might likewise need something more substantial than these crushes that they nurse in secret, to propel them past the complications of a dating relationship. And at least one of them needs to be willing to risk a little embarrassment when the time may come. One last note, I do appreciate that they don't leave the matter of Chinatsu's misunderstanding about a Hina-Taiki festival date hanging overlong. While not yet addressed due to her absence, Taiki knows that he must have come off as a liar and he means to correct it. The series is full of small understandings, limited perspectives, but it does not milk them over long for melodrama, and this strikes me as the latest example. It assuages our worry that Blue Box isn't reaching for that overworn romantic trope to drive its dramatic progression, which is why I think it came up so quickly in an episode that otherwise isn't about the love triangle element with Hina or about Chinatsu's thoughts in the aftermath of the festival. Well, that was an episode. Diamond and Dust makes their appearance as characters, significant background is filled in, Nina and Momoka make up for having no fights last episode by having 2 major confrontations this time, the rhythm section continues to help keep the band in sync, we get something at least adjacent to a confession, and somehow, there isn't a single protest or even comment about the new band name Nina plucked from the air. I've got my work cut out for me this week, so forgive me for focusing on a few specific things. The threat hanging over the band's unity last episode came from the 2 decisions we discussed at length. Momoka quitting the band, and Nina quitting cram school. And Nina's decision was easier to understand, as the episode spent a lot more time on her mindset. This time, we do the same thing for Momoka, by filling in a lot more about Diamond Dust, so we'll begin there, and afterwards, we'll look at her 2 fights with Nina. The combination of these threads leads to Momoka changing her mind and everyone's direction. The expanded information around her old group comes from 3 places. The pre-credits flashback, Momoka's explanation to Nina outside a DD performance that is intermixed with more flashbacks, and the actual first encounter between old and new bandmates at the end. For starters, it seems like Momoka was a lot of the driving force in Diamond Dust, the one setting goals and optimistically planning moves towards their future. She is trying to convince them to drop out of school, discouraging any kind of half measures or escape routes, and all while writing out a pie-in-the-sky goal that is all too familiar, to make it to the Budokan. She has a black and white do-or-die outlook on this whole rock band theme, even seems to have a sense of urgency, as though waiting just to graduate might put the entire dream beyond reach. No doubt, this memory is on her mind because of Nina's announcement, as Nina is also surrendering her escape route to throw everything into her musical aspiration. Presumably, Momoka's fervor and persuasion won out in the past. The others also abandoned any backup plans to follow her lead, and now in the present, she is the one who bailed out. She demanded they give up any other future, and now does not even walk alongside them in the one she chose. This is an important clarification. Momoko was the one who quit, so we might have imagined that she was the most reluctant member, that she went along with dropping out only to keep the band together. To learn she was the instigator, and maybe some of the others dropped out only at her urging, is a completely different picture. A part of why Nina feels so hurt right now is that Momoko asked a lot of her, pushed her to become the kind of singer she is, and so the announcement of quitting feels like a gut punch, a betrayal. I wouldn't fault any of the Diamond Dust members for feeling similarly put out, if not more so, considering they spent years more going down the path of no return than Nina has. Momoko must surely know this. The regret we can tell hangs off of her, I now assume is also shot through with guilt. Diamond Dust continues to play, and continues to accept the changes asked of them for the sake of success, and whether or not they like it, she was part of why they are in this position without any fallback plan. So, of course, she doesn't hold a grudge against them. If anything, we should expect them to hold a grudge against her. And of course, it would be in poor taste for her to criticize the way they've changed, the things they've chosen to survive. She bears responsibility for putting them into that position. Whether or not she thinks she made the right choice, she actively tried to eliminate their overall choices. And no wonder she wants to avoid them, wants to avoid even the topic of them. But what she also wants to avoid is repeating history. The second and especially crucial encounter is when she takes Nina to show her a Diamond Dust performance, and I rather like the symbolism of them viewing it from behind. Nina had only ever been an audience member to the band, both literally and figuratively viewing them from the front. But Momoko sees them from a backstage perspective, and it's that perspective she shares. For me, this helps clarify something I talked about last time, Momoko's odd statement that her songs wouldn't work at a professional level. I thought maybe something so specific meant that she'd been told so directly, or was being sidelined as a songwriter. But it turns out to be a gap in our understanding. Nina's surprise at the audience makeup for the Diamond Dust concert she attended, and the surprise at the whole idol band makeover, that led me to believe that the shift was rather sudden, that they were a rock band that got signed, were then asked to make all these aesthetic and musical changes, and Momoko bailed rather than make the switch. Evidently, that is not what happened. It was instead a gradual change, turning up the heat on what Momoko could tolerate. So, when Momoko explains how they were against being an idol band, that they'd only play their music, we are to understand that their mindset back then was the same as Nina's is now. But, as Momoko explains, even if they were praised, they didn't sell tickets. She relates that over a memory of them seeing more idol-like outfits prepared for them to perform in. And Momoko is the fiercest in opposition, but one of her bandmates will stop her from grabbing the outfits and doing something to them. She says only the most laughable acts would become hits. The things you might scoff at are what become popular. And then we see that they did all accept the costume change. There's no sense of how long this goes on or how many times Momoko performs, but the way she says that truth slowly begins to pressure you makes me think it was something more gradual. She sees that they will increasingly have to do the things that will sell tickets. That's actually the first part of what she says to Nina when showing her Diamond Dust on stage in front of a large audience. That this is what it means to not set escape routes and survive. They can't afford to just play the songs they like. To survive, they must chase what will sell, what will be liked, what will go viral. Choose to reject that, and you can't continue. This, then, is where her comment about songwriting must come from. They don't work at a professional level means that they are not enough by themselves to work at a professional level. They weren't selling tickets only on the strength of their musical merits, but needed the added boost of an idol-like makeover. Needing to become one of those laughable acts suggested to Momoko that she wasn't a good enough writer to survive without such tactics. Presumably, she thinks the same thing will happen again, and the same choice will be presented. She'll tell Nina she doesn't want her to make the same choice she did, but we're going to come back to that. To complete our picture of Diamond Dust, then, we need to hear from them, brief as it may be. When they happen upon Momoko in the midst of her second fight, they'll recognize her and call out, which causes Momoko to flee. In fact, she's so desperate not to run into them that she'll leave Nina behind when she hesitates. Luckily, Nina has no shortage of reckless impulses and will halt Momoko's escape, allowing Diamond Dust to catch up. But when they try to approach, Momoko will lay on the horn, telling them to back off. And I gotta say, this was such a cool way to stage this reunion. The dramatic near accident hanging frozen in the truck's position, the atypical setting to have this shouted conversation, Diamond Dust in their stage outfits still. If someone dropped you onto the scene without any context, you'd still pick up the sense of a dramatic and unexpected confrontation. And Momoko really doesn't want to confront or be confronted, hence laying on the horn, but her old bandmates seem to understand this, since the first to call out says that she doesn't have to say anything, just listen. And then a different one says they heard she started a band, while the final original member says that they look forward to it. Having these lines shared among her former bandmates tell us that they are on the same page about what they're saying. It's not a single person's opinion. Now, those lines alone tell us that they are not harboring a grudge towards her, that they aren't chasing after her because they want to fight. They even still call her Momocon, like in the opening flashback, with a familiarity that implies remaining unchanged in their eyes. Learning that Momoko did not actually give up music hasn't made them bitter, but the opposite. They're glad to learn she is trying again, and they look forward to seeing what the new band is like. The next part, though, seems like the real kindness when we imagine Momoko's state of mind. The way she ruminated on the flashback, where she urged the rest to drop school and every other contingency, seemed like something that could leave her racked with guilt, that they were stuck on this path because of her, and she doesn't have the decency to suffer alongside. Likewise, during her explanation to Nina, she'll imagine the other members reading all the fan outrage over their changes, over Momoko leaving the band, over what they've become, and she pictures them dejected at their response to their choices. Thus, the kindness. They shout out that they don't regret anything, that they're going to make it to the top, that they weren't wrong. They are not suffering and trapped and regretful. Instead, they are determined to reach towards greater heights. They've accepted what they've done to get there and will keep going. To make it a point to tell her that they are still aiming at the top and that they have no regrets is effectively absolving Momoko of blame. She has nothing to feel guilty about. Now, several things culminate in the next part of that encounter, so we are going to circle back to that. The important lesson so far is that Momoko's idea of what she is to Diamond Dust has turned out to be in error. The imagined crisis of a collision was one that only existed in her head. She was running from this encounter because she thought she knew how it would go, and I would wager that this wasn't what she imagined. Likewise, Momoko is running from Nina's push to go pro because of the outcome she envisions. But the problem may not be in the external realities they can't control, the inherent way of the world. This may also be a crisis that only exists in Momoko's head. As said, there are two big confrontations, and Momoko has two different understandings for each of them. The first one, inside the rest stop, is when Momoko believes Nina is acting unilaterally and recklessly over some naive pipe dream, a girl whose priorities are all awry. She starts by demanding she apologize for using the stage to air her personal things, that she violated a space that's meant for the audience, and Subaru, at least, agrees with this. That kind of ignorance or unprofessionalism aligns in Momoko's head with her picture of Nina as someone getting way ahead of themselves, as someone with so little understanding of the music biz that she would, well, attempt to go pro right away and seek to challenge a band like Diamond Dust, all while trying to drag the rest of them along with her impulses. Worse still, though, Nina is antagonizing her directly, blaming the sudden announcement of leaving the band for why she used the stage to tell them about quitting cram school. She'll grill her about why she didn't move home, why she started a band if she's so certain of the outcome. And when Momoko refuses to answer, telling her to go back to cram school, Nina accuses her of running away. The temerity of this, and perhaps the truth of it, nearly drives Momoko to violence. It does not quite rise to that, but that escalation is a clue for us to how sharply Nina's words affect Momoko, that she has touched a sensitive, perhaps wounded part of her. Violence in this case isn't so much about Momoko being the kind of girl that would punch out a bandmate, as it is about Nina having struck a nerve. Let's remember that for the later encounter. Ultimately, Nina herself diffuses the situation by invoking her own wounded past, telling Momoko if she strikes her, she'll be able to hate her, that she would be just the same as them. In this case, I assume she means the people who bullied her in the past, and I'm tempted to think that this is how Momoko takes it as well. She doesn't want to be one of those, and disengages. The difference between this and the later fight is down to a shift in perspective facilitated by a third party, so let's take a brief detour to praise our rhythm section yet again. Rupa plays the role of the Tomo Whisperer throughout the episode, preventing her from running away during this fight at the rest area, countering Tomo's statement that it's over again with her own belief that it's the beginning, and generally attempting to counter Tomo's pessimism with optimism. It seems clear that some kind of infighting wrecked their previous band, explaining Tomo's aversion and worry, but Rupa has a sharper insight on what is going on between Momoko and Nina. I'm rather tickled that she'll say directly that the opposite of like is indifference, as it's something I feel like I say all the time, and is relevant for these last 2 episodes. Last time I pointed out that the girls fighting over the band's name was evidence of their investment in it, how much they cared about it, and conversely, the lack of an actual confrontation between Nina and Momoko was evidence of how checked out Momoko had become. This, I believe, is what Rupa means when she tells Tomo that they should welcome infighting. It is not always evidence of a fatal flaw, so much as a problem in the midst of being fixed. Subaru, though, is the real VIP. When Momoko gets dropped off at her home, Subaru will get off as well, saying that the trains are still running and she knows it's a pain to go to the area she lives. In reality, I'm quite sure Rupa knows that the trains aren't running, but they are on the same wavelength here. There's obviously something she wants to discuss with Momoko. And 2, one less passenger means they can both spare Tomo a longer car ride in her motion 6 state, but they don't have to make her feel like they put themselves out on her behalf. It's hard work keeping this motley crew in sync, but they seem to be equal to it. Subaru comes right out with admitting she wants to chat, and we get a kind of visual echo of Nina and Momoko's meetup after Subaru quickly exited practice and ignored their text back in episode 4. After some light small talk, Subaru lays it on her. Nina is not, in fact, acting unilaterally and recklessly on some misguided impression of the heights their band can reach, talking about going pro before they even have their indie band debut, as Momoko says. Instead, they are ahead of the game. They've been accepted to the festival, are in fact one of the most anticipated acts. An agency has already reached out to Rupa. A singer praised Nina's voice in a way that went viral, and the addition of their mystery duo with the strong online following has culminated in this. Togenashi Togiari has quickly amassed a following of over 27,000 despite their very short tenure. Now, do the earlier numbers on following size come back into relevance? I don't think Diamond Dust remains at 20,000. I imagine they are far higher than our fivesome at this point, as it's implied they had rapidly gained 10,000 in the wake of their label debut. That's not the comparison to make. Rather, it's the one between them and what the venue owner said about the indie band version of Diamond Dust. They reached a height of 10,000, which was enough to get on the radar of agencies. Even without the indie band debut that Momoko expects as a first step, they have blown way past what her old band managed in their 3 or so years fighting to make a name for themselves. Momoko just wasn't paying attention, wasn't even thinking about such a future, and this is all a rather shocking reveal. But it's only half of it. Nina isn't acting only on her own whims, trying to force the band into her grudge match with Diamond Dust. Rupa and Tomo always wanted to go pro, and joined them in that pursuit. And Subaru just likes doing what she does. Momoko had a picture of Nina as this headstrong girl out of sync with the rest, but it is Momoko herself who has become the one offbeat. The rest are united in this pursuit, and she is not only the one holding out, but the one with the least understanding of the band's position and success. That should be sobering for the girl who is supposed to be the experienced industry veteran. It does not change Momoko's mind, but stokes a different worry. Not about the band or its direction, but about Nina. Subaru shares that Nina is always saying that they need to set a goal and corner themselves, and that reminds Momoko of herself in the past. And so, this shift in her understanding, to learn that they really are close to the starting line of a pro band, is the motivation that she takes into the second confrontation. Now, part of it we've discussed already, the backstage perspective on Diamond Dust and the difficult choices they made in order to survive. This wasn't something she shared when they were just a hobby band, but if they're this close, then I guess she feels the warning must be delivered sooner rather than later. After building the picture of the choice they faced, she tells Nina the critical thing. She doesn't want her to make the same choice she did. She answers the earlier question about wanting to start a band and make music again, that it was because of Nina's singing, something she did out of love rather than wanting money or recognition. That also echoes something Mine said about Nina's singing and the reason for the gifted guitar, that her voice wasn't unpleasantly seeking attention. And now comes something that we've referenced several times in our discussion, that there are a lot of aspects of Nina that make her seem like a version of Momoko shifted in time. Even Mine's compliment to Nina drew a parallel to her. There are literal echoes, like dropping out at 17 to come to the city, or the impact of Mine earlier in their paths. But for Momoko, the real parallel is what she said at the end of episode 2 when ultimately convincing Nina to join her, that Nina is just like the songs she'd forgotten about, the ones she loves and wants to keep holding on to. Then, as now, she cradles Nina's face with her hands, an expression of the tenderness she feels. But this isn't directed entirely at Nina. Momoko is, in part, speaking to her younger self. The girl who moved to Tokyo with her head full of dreams and a heart full of a love for music has instead become the Momoko of the present, cynical over the compromises demanded of her, insecure over the inability to succeed on her own terms, and guilty over quitting Diamond Dust and imagining the others suffering without her. If Togonashi Togiari goes pro, she imagines Nina facing the same path and the same heartache. Since she can't undo her own disillusionment, she can at least forestall Nina's own, preserving her idealistic love of the stage a little longer. She says, "You were the version of myself I loved, someone I used to be." For Momoko, this is one part charity and one part self-flagellation, and it is completely, entirely misguided. Nina is not Momoko at 17, but Nina at 17. And this Nina has sacrificed much and fought her own tendencies to become someone who chooses her own path. Whether by threat of violence or words of kindness, an attempt to corral Nina into her own expectations is, to Nina, nothing but hostility. "What about her feelings?" she asks, and then shouts, and when Momoko grabs her to stop her running away, Nina slaps her. Like the incident at the rest stop, I think the violence is more about the sharpness of the emotion the offender is feeling. Momoko has touched a wound. She says she's not her memory, "Don't lock me inside your memory," and then we cut to a memory. The resolution of the school's attempt to sweep the bullying under the rug and force a handshake between Nina and her tormentor. From their two expressions, you can tell this is not a truce. It's a victory for the bully and defeat for Nina. Or at least it would be if she accepts it. She's mouthing the words to Momoko's song throughout, before raising her voice, refusing the handshake to run out, and evidently does the stunt taking over the broadcast room. What does this sequence of scenes have to do with one another, then? Partially, I think Nina is equating Momoko's intent with that of the people in her past, who most wanted a peace that was the absence of conflict or scandal. No one in that room cares about how Nina feels more than they care about creating a face-saving resolution. They are more than willing for her to go unheard if it saves them the trouble she could cause by insisting that the school allowed her to suffer prolonged bullying. And so the broadcast. She does not go unheard. She does not meekly accept others invalidating her feelings for their own peace of mind, and the song she plays is the very one that gave her the motivation to do so. To have Momoko, the writer of that song, now attempt to do something similar to her is rather hard to bear. Momoko is trying to spare her own feelings, saving herself from watching Nina go through what she did, rather than considering what Nina wants, or especially how Nina would feel to be the reason Momoko gives for walking away. And there's more when we return from the flashback. It's possible I'm reading too much into this, but Nina's words, tears, and tone when she says, "There are people who decided to live because of your songs," makes me think that Nina had become suicidal during her bullying, with a lack of support from the school or in her home. Momoko's song isn't just something she likes. It's something that saved her, and that salvation only exists because of everything Momoko put into making the song and Diamond Dust a reality. Nina tells her the thing she needs to protect isn't that memory of herself, the person she used to be. What she needs to protect was what that person desired, to make songs that reach people, to express all her joy and anger and sadness, the whole reason she started a band and came to Tokyo. You see, playing in a band with her school friends wasn't the actual root thing driving Momoko, or else she wouldn't have started again. Instead, Diamond Dust was the way that drive manifested, the means by which her songs might reach others, and Nina is living proof that she succeeded, is in fact only there at all because she succeeded. Momoko has misunderstood. Nina isn't trying to take their band pro and compete with Diamond Dust because she wants to be in a successful band, or out of resentment towards the way they've changed, or even to beat her ex-friend. Those are just the ways her drive has manifested. Her driving goal is to prove Momoko's songs are good enough, that they can reach people as they reached her, and she is willing to bet everything on her. Little wonder Nina is so angry and sad and desperate that Momoko might be giving it all up because she's scared of what might happen, and she pleads with Momoko not to use her to run away. But Diamond Dust interrupting their fight is reason enough to run away, apparently, and so this catches us back up with where I left off, with her old bandmates shouting out their message of looking forward to her new band, and their own resolve to keep climbing toward the top. I love the blocking in this scene, with her old bandmates roughly in a line to signal their unity, while Hina, the stranger to Momoko, hangs back. Momoko is faced away from them, but also in the driver's seat of a running vehicle, able to exit the conversation entirely at the slightest provocation. But Nina stands on the same plane as Momoko, signaling their unity while facing back at Diamond Dust, not running, but meeting their challenge face on, and in fact, adding back some of her own. Well, this strange girl interceding in their reunion is unexpected and kind of presumptuous, bordering on rude, so one will ask her, who does she think she is? But during that, the camera doesn't frame the speaker, it frames Hina, hanging at the back, and she is smiling, though with her head down as though she is hiding it. We will come back to that. Momoko then finally speaks up. I want to point out that she didn't speak up when Diamond Dust shouted at her, but did so after their provocation of Nina, who answered in her place. And while Momoko sounds like she's trashing them for their crappy performance and not being cute enough as an idol band, the smiles on her former bandmates' faces say that this isn't real venom or criticism, it's something they expect from her. It's something familiar and maybe a bit missed. Well, it's her talking to them at all, at least. I'd wager they've tried to reach out before and have been stonewalled. And then Momoko tells them that they're entering the next festival. If they play like crap there, she's going to steal all their fans, and Nina delivers her own declaration of war. But this really isn't about establishing these two bands as rivals. It's about how the two threads we've discussed culminate in Momoko staying in the band, her challenge the confirmation. She had the wrong idea about both her former and current bandmates, and now corrected, can hardly do otherwise. Even if she sort of curses herself as they drive away, after realizing she just committed to reversing her decision. Now, this reunion didn't go the way Momoko expected, and we have forestalled a Nina-Hina reunion to a later point to let this one take the stage. But perhaps that, too, won't go the way that Nina expects if Hina's hidden smile is anything to go by. When questioned, she'll say she doesn't know the girl, but perhaps she means she doesn't know this version of her, the one who stands her ground and shouts challenges back at strangers. That is the part she's smiling at, after all. No need to speculate too much on it, nor do I want to speculate too much about the very last scene. Though Momoko is perturbed at realizing she's back in the saddle, Nina laughs in relief as they drive away. She has come to a decision and confesses to Momoko that she really does love her. In discussion with more knowledgeable people than myself, I've learned that the wording she uses is not restricted to meaning a romantic reveal, but can be used that way. Similar to our word confession, which can also be used for revealing a crime, it's the unveiling of something hidden. So I don't want to ponder or debate if this is romantic in nature, as the next episode will probably quickly clear that up. Instead, it's Nina's sense of relief and their mutual emotional response that gets my attention. The confession and her relieved state while giving it is something Nina does in response to Momoko deciding to continue forward. Nina admired and adored her from afar, her savior and inspiration, and those feelings have grown in the time they've spent together. But as Momoko retracted and thinks of giving it all up, Nina's feelings become a source of pain instead. When Momoko further models behavior that so harmed Nina in the past, her affections towards Momoko become bittersweet indeed. I think this whole episode, and part of the last one, show a Nina thinking about quitting Momoko, if you will, hence her comment in the rest stop about being able to hate her if she really does swing at her. In fact, all of Nina's emotional outbursts in these last 2 episodes make more sense to me when imagining her as someone thinking she might need to end a relationship for her own good, but desperately preferring that it work itself out instead. Nina has been holding her breath, basically, and that spark of the old defiant Momoko rising to the challenge is enough for her to exhale. This version of Momoko she can allow herself to love, to whatever extent she means that love. To hear that so plainly, and perhaps the subtext that it was in question, crescendos all the roiling emotions in Momoko to a point she can't contain, and so it's her turn to pour out all her joy and anger and sadness. Unstoppering Momoko's bottled-up feelings is, I think, a proof of victory for Nina, who has a little cry herself. And we end with the rest of the band getting their own relief through texts that the meeting went well. We still have a band. And you know what a band really needs? Goals! I skipped this in the encounter with Diamond Dust, but the last thing they shouted at her was that they won't forget. And as Momoko flashes back to the Budokan goal she wrote out in chalk, that is probably what was meant. Presuming that Momoko is reconciled, this should mean that all 9 people in these 2 bands are aiming for the Budokan. The significance of playing there will differ a bit between them, but doing so serves as proof of whatever it is each has set out to prove. I feel like that has its own pitfalls, but we'll have to see how it plays out. Nina has somehow wrangled her goal of beating a Diamond Dust into an actual competition at the same time, and I'm curious if that will change anything about how Togenashi Togiyari goes about things. They are playing from behind, after all, and now that this fact is no longer a reason to not bother, there are realities they'll have to address about the gulf between them in recognition, resources, and support. But sharing a goal will make all the difference, I imagine. In conflicts, we had a potential one diffuse with hardly a whimper. Nina dropping out of cram school means leaving home for good and losing the support that affords her stay in town, which I thought had potential to threaten her stay in the band. Instead, the Beef Bowl place apparently can handle another employee, and Nina at least isn't immediately out on the street. And let me tell you, no matter what else we learn about Nina's father, I can't imagine a more scathing indictment than the emotionless and perfunctory note she sends home alongside his bank book. This entire chapter of cram school appears to only have been about Nina's evolution in choosing direction, something to run toward rather than from, and at this point, her letter is basically a formality rather than some weighty, agonized decision. Overcoming the conflict of Momoko quitting is instead given all the gravitas and attention, and a possible disruption from a run-in with Diamond Dust now seems something that we can put to bed as well. It actually had the opposite effect of providing motivation. Things are kind of looking up around here, no? In characterization, I just want to add a little bit more about Tomo, whose role in the episode was largely to personify the tension of Momoko and Nina's spat and the threat that it posed to the group. She will again largely bend to Rupa's advice when she stops her from leaving the rest area fight, but she still takes a grim outlook on it. Whatever happened before must have looked similar enough to the Momoko and Nina infighting that Tomo concludes that they are likewise about to implode before they've hardly started, and it seems to make her rather gun-shy. This girl seized her future with her own hands at a young age, and continues to keep the Budokan poster above her desk, so it's not like she's just naturally pessimistic. There is instead some sort of sensitive place in her that their conflict seems to touch. Maybe we'll learn more, but right now, it doesn't seem like it will affect her behavior at least. World building was a lot of what happened today, updating both our past and present understanding of Diamond Dust, and filling in more of Nina's bullying saga. The realities of the live music scene continue to churn off stage, and Subaru's interlude with Momoko clues us in on these developments, most notably the reasons for their meteoric rise. We also had a curious little doubling in Mine's gift to Nina of the guitar, and the later reveal that Hina has begun playing guitar for their shows as well, despite being a vocalist only in the concert that Nina attended. Perhaps nothing comes of Nina experimenting with the instrument. It might only have been a kind of defiance against Momoko, who basically forbade her from picking up an instrument in the afterglow of their first performance. I wonder, though, if part of Nina thought about learning as a contingency in case Momoko really did quit. I might expect she would put it aside now, if that is the case, but would she be interested again now that she's seen Hina play? I feel like the guitar's presence or absence in future episodes tells us something either way. Finally, in theme, we got a real exclamation point on that ongoing exploration of a song's meaning or impact, of what one takes out of it or puts into it. Nina deciding to live on over Momoko's work is about as dramatic an example as you can ask for, and her emotional plea to Momoko to continue pouring herself into more songs still is the accompanying counternote. I doubt Momoko wrote it believing she'd rescue some teenage girl from despair and death, but now faced with that reality, how does her own impression of her songwriting change? How much more important might it seem? How much more worth the effort? Nina has hammered on about how much the song meant to her all along, building to this explanatory reveal at perhaps the moment it would impact Momoko the most. It reframes Momoko's hang-up over her songwriting, the faith she lost over believing it wasn't enough on its own. Nina presents her a different metric for success, not in the tickets she manages to sell, but in the listeners she manages to reach. Related to that is a thematic pattern that is particularly pronounced in this episode, but is woven into a lot of the work so far. To simplify it, I want to equate two ideas: the act of saving face and the concept of popularity. Both are related to the opinion of society. Saving face means avoiding social scorn, and popularity means enjoying social approval. Lots of human behaviors are steered by the perception of what a society allows or forbids. These are known as social mores. They are a part of the status quo of any group of people. I want to propose that we have a through line of rock and roll as serving as something that is not necessarily in opposition to these mores, but as a counternote, an alternative, at times an antidote. The spirit of rock presented in the premiere was overwhelmingly one about defiance, pushing back against the inertia of the past or a return to an approved status quo. Nina's journey from cram school attendee to singer is all about an action she took to save face that she abandons for rock and roll. When Momoko is trying to urge Nina to join them on stage in her ridiculous outfit, she describes all of these qualities of hers that, as Nina points out, are not compliments. They are not things society approves of her feeling, but those very things she feels and how they war within her is rock and roll. To express them on stage is to throw that disapproval back in society's face. So too did Momoko think of Mine's solitary performance as rock and roll, fighting with her song on stage despite being only a footnote of an appearance, despite not being the popular act. Subaru plays drums as a kind of rebellion against the expectations placed upon her, something disreputable compared to a family legacy of acting. Tomo is caustically dismissive of the agencies they'd spoken to, who just latch on to what sells right now. And Nina, of course, chose not to accept the face-saving compromise of making nice with her bully, not only inspired by a rock song, but using it to proclaim her rejection. In this episode, we see an example of bullying against Rupa, whose name and darker skin suggest an ethnic origin outside of Japan. In her role as customer service, she must act to save face, but she tells Nina that this is why she needs rock and roll too. The segment of Japanese society that holds her ethnicity against her is large, but we can see in the long selfie line she generates that this is no liability in the world of rock. It may even be an asset. In the light of all those examples, changing one's band for the sake of mainstream popularity is, well, not very rock and roll, is it? A small wonder Momoko's gut instinct was to run away from what was asked of Diamond Dust. to chase what will sell, what will be liked, what will go viral, the things Momoko said are necessary to survive, seem instead to be in opposition to the spirit of rock as the series has described it. To be sure, popularity in the world of rock is being treated differently than popularity in the sense of a wider society. However we are measuring success here requires a number of people who approve. But I feel a distinction is being made between doing things that become popular and doing things because they are popular. The difference isn't in the outcome, but in the intent. Togonashi Togiyari singing whatever they want and skyrocketing to 27,000 followers is treated as a sign of victory because their decisions to this point had nothing to do with courting public appeal. At the same time, Diamond Dust's larger popularity is viewed differently by some because they did choose behaviors aimed at earning that larger following. Now that these two bands are really set up to be in contention, I feel like this ideological tension will remain prominent. That's all for this week. Let me remind you again that whether or not there is a Casual Monday next week, there won't be a Girls Band Cry segment, so we'll pick up episode 9 2 weeks hence. Bye everyone.